So we're going to talk about school-based supports and interventions. So we do a lot of research on kids who are fully included. Are children included here in schools? So if you have autism and you can do the academics or you're verbal, do you go to just a regular school with all the other kids? Yes? They're all getting their headphones on. They have no idea what I'm saying. They do? Yes, they do. So kids go to general ed school. So in the United States, we have the same thing. Some kids go to general ed programs, and some kids go into special education, sort of segregated classrooms in a regular school. So mostly I'm going to talk about kids who are in inclusion, because we have done quite a bit of research in this particular area. It's that there's a big movement in the United States for children to be fully included. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what child experiences are in school, and then some interventions for social development, and then some teacher tools. So in the United States, we have policies around inclusion. So it's called the least restrictive environment for a lot of kids, not for all. And we know that, at least in the United States, about 60% of the children have normal intellectual functioning by the time around age 8. So they may test delayed or ID in preschool, but many of those children will test in the normal ranges by age 8. And that's because our tests in preschool, they're not very accurate on intellectual disability until you're a little bit older. Unless you test very, very low, and then it's fairly stable. So a lot of our kids are delayed in preschool, and then they're functioning intellectually in the typical range by about 3rd grade. So for those kids, the primary struggle for them is really around social issues. They can do a lot of the academics, but they struggle with kind of the social nuances of interacting with their peers, making friends, and also kind of staying on the schedule. So the concerns are more behavioral social than they are as much academic. So we've had children, just in terms of the amount of mainstreaming or inclusion over time, it's really been increasing. This is kind of an old slide. Only went up to 2008, but you can see just the shift from special schools or special education classrooms to more inclusion over time. So one of the interesting things, now that we have a lot of adults who are very verbal and like to talk about their experiences going to school, we get information about what those experiences are at school from adults and adolescents. So I'm going to show you some little clips of an adult and some adolescents talking about recess. So you guys have recess? Right? So during school, you have times out on the playground, right? Or out on break. Yes? Yes. Recess, playground? Yes. And so we asked these individuals just to reflect back on their experiences. So.
So for me, the playground, the point was, well, the cafeteria is hell. So you eat lunch as fast as you can to get out there as fast as you can so you can get a space to be by yourself. get on the swing and start swinging, because while you're swinging as high as you can, one, you have rhythmic movement that's very soothing, and two, you don't have to deal with anybody.
I mean, for me, I had such a hard time with my learning and everything that I really wasn't on the yard that much.
So you didn't even go out to
I mean,
play?
I tried, but it sometimes a lot of times ended in a conflict or with me, not knowing, because I don't know what the best thing was to do in certain situations.
Right.
So, like, if someone might try to be friends with me, I might not have tried to be friends back with them, and tried to, I've done something that might have seemed like I was trying to be enemies with them.
Well, when you were out on the yard, so you mostly talked with your friend, did you guys ever play any games together?
No.
No?
Very rarely.
Very rarely. If there was ever a game you played, do you remember trying?
Not really. We attempted to stay out of games as much as we can.
Why did you say, it sounds like you were trying not to play them.
Exactly.
Why is that?
I don't really know. We weren't the physical game, and I don't really like games like that.
Okay, so one of the things to note is that these are individuals who are thinking back to their experiences, right? So that's very different from actually experiencing it in the moment. So if you think yourself about growing up and what elementary school was like, or primary school, that's, you might have different feelings about it now as an adult than you might have as a child. And I think those are things that we need to consider, right? Because adults with autism tell us lots of stories about growing up, and you just have to balance that with what a child might be going through him or herself. There are also just the verbal ability differences amongst our individuals. Some people can't really express what happened. These are all very verbal individuals. So if we look at children, these are two boys that are both 8 years old. They're both in full inclusion, third graders. They were in my early intervention study. One got the joint attention intervention, one got the play intervention. But we asked them, this is in the ADOS, the diagnostic instrument, which you guys talked about, right? Yeah. And so it's a mod 3, so we're asking them questions about their friends or what their experiences are at school. So the first little boy, he's answering questions about being teased at school.
Do you get along good with the kids at school?
Yeah.
Yeah? Are there sometimes things that they do that make you mad or irritate you?
No.
No? Pretty good. Do kids ever tease you?
No.
Do you ever tease kids?
No.
Oh, okay, good. Do you
Okay, so she's asking him, do you ever tease kids? He's saying no. Do kids tease you? Do you tease kids? No, no. What do you think? Do you think that he knows? Yeah, he's pretty unaware of his situation, so his mother reports that he's being teased a lot at school and bullied. But of course, his viewpoint of that is different. So he doesn't see that. Okay, let's look at the next little boy.
Were you ever teased or bullied at school?
I think so, but not really. I think so. Maybe a long time ago. Maybe, I don't know.
You don't remember?
No.
You
Yeah,
know?
no. I don't. Not even bullied. I never saw that bullied.
Mhm. Do you ever try to change things so that other people won't tease you?
Yeah, but it doesn't work.
It doesn't work?
Yeah.
What have you tried?
I tried being nice to them, trying to be happy and do stuff that I'm supposed to do when bullies are bullying me or something. But it doesn't always work.
It doesn't always work.
Yeah.
Does it work sometimes?
Yeah, sometimes.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay, so he has strategies he uses for when kids bully him. And he says, he tries to make them happy. He tries to go along with what they want. It doesn't always work, but he tries. So he has strategies, but those are probably not very effective strategies. We probably don't want him to go along with the bully. And his mother reports that he is bullied at school, that he has one friend who's a girl, but that he's trying to learn how to sort of cope with that. All right, so all of these different individuals have different experiences. So there's a lot of variability in what happens to kids at school. So we probably will learn the most about what's going on by actually asking them, but we oftentimes don't ask the individuals themselves. We tend to just apply interventions, right? We think about social interventions without sort of considering that those two boys in particular might need very different kinds of interventions to be effective. So one of the things that happens in the United States is we have a lot of clinic-based social skills groups, and they tend to follow kind of a regular curriculum, sort of how you start a conversation, how you enter a game, what you do if someone's teasing you. So it gives kids strategies. But what those programs don't do is they don't understand what the kid's experience is at school. So you might be teaching them skills which can be useful, but may have very little relevance to their day-to-day lives. So again, I think it's very important that we ask kids and then think about how we individualize those treatments for kids. So we've been doing this for a while, where we go into classrooms of children who have mostly typical kids, but maybe one or two kids with autism in the class. And we ask all the kids about who hangs out with whom. So we want to know, who do they hang out with? Who are their friends? And to put a circle around their 3 best friends and to star their very best friend. We also ask them, who are the kids you don't like to hang out with, right? So most kids get that and have no problems with it. Adults sometimes don't like that question. But everybody sort of gets it. You don't like to hang out with everybody at work. There's some people you hang out with more and some people you don't. And then we ask kids, well, who hangs out with whom on the playground? So think about girls and boys, and then circle those kids that hang out together and put yourself in groups. So kids can be in multiple groups. And so when you do this, you can get a lot of information. You can find out how connected that child is to other kids in their class. So how popular the social group is that child might be in. You can find out if children nominate someone as a best friend, if those friends nominate him or her back. So you get reciprocity in friendships. You just find out how many friends they nominate. We have kids with autism who nominate the whole class as their friend, and we have kids who nominate no one. And then what's important is how many kids nominate the child, your target child with autism, as a friend. And from that information, you can draw maps. These are social network maps. And you can see that this is a class of kids. We have 2 kids down at the bottom, I forget, Nicholas and Nolan, who got some nominations to groups. That's what the numbers are behind their names, but nothing consistent. So they're not really in any group. So they would be more isolated. We have a child, Sam, in red letters, who's connected to Ella, so one other child. And so that child with autism is it's a pretty typical map for a kid with autism. They're oftentimes connected to one child or just kind of hanging on to a group. We call it peripheral. And then you see other kids with numbers in the middle that suggest how strong that network is. So from all this information, we get a sense of who's popular in the class, or nuclear, who's secondary, so kind of in the mix, who's peripheral, and who's isolated. And we've done this now with hundreds of typical kids and about, I think, 300 or 400 kids with autism across a number of years. And what we consistently find is that a small group of our kids with autism are isolated, but not as many as you would think. The first study we did, we didn't have any isolated kids with autism at all. It was a pretty small study in pretty nice included classrooms. So typically it's about maybe 20% of the kids. We also have some kids with autism who are nuclear or popular. They could be the most popular kid in their class. Now these are primary school kids, elementary, so like kindergarten to 5th grade. So these are fairly young kids. The majority of kids are peripheral, as I was saying. So they're kind of hanging on to a group, or they're kind of in the mix, but not too solidly. So in thinking about those networks and trying to move children into situations where they're more connected to the peer group, we did a study a few years ago where we tested 2 models that were very common in the schools. One is this child-assisted approach, which is where you assign the child a one-on-one aide. Do you guys do that here? Kids get one-on-one aides? I don't know. Yes, I got a couple of yeses. Right, so that's a very common approach in the United States. The other approach is peer-mediated. So you just use some of the peers from the class to actually help all the kids in the class make friends better. So we compared those two. So the child-assisted approach, we use multiple informants. We got information from the parents, from the teacher, and from the children themselves, from those maps. And then we figured out what the child's top 3 problems were on the playground. So maybe they didn't know the games, maybe they didn't enter the group, maybe they were aggressive, maybe they only wanted to play on one piece of equipment every day. And then we would work on those problems one at a time. The peer-mediated approach was we selected 3 peers from the class of kids that the child with autism was in. And then we talked to those peers and we would say, well, who on the playground has difficulty playing with other kids? And they would identify kids. We never said the word autism. We never identified the kid with autism that we were concerned about. And then we had the peers actually generate the solutions. So this design was a 2x2 design. So kids, we had about 60 kids with autism, and they were randomized to either get the child assisted. So we gave them a UCLA researcher who would work with them a couple of times a week on their problems, one at a time. Or they had the 3 peers from the classroom, and they worked with a UCLA researcher. And they just generated solutions, and they had missions, in between sessions to go out and help kids on the playground. Then you could get both of those treatments, but not together. They were done separately. Or you just had no treatment at all, which was just inclusion. And what we learned was that peers matter. So I would have thought that working on the child's problems one at a time with an expert researcher was going to make the biggest difference, right? We were going to try to fix those problems so the child could go out and do better, during recess. And that's not at all what happened. So what we found was that anytime you had peers in the intervention, those kids were more connected on those maps, and they were less isolated on the playground. And when we came back so this was a very short-term intervention, only 6 weeks, 12 sessions, so twice a week. When we came back in 3 months, we saw somewhat of a drop, as you can see, but it was still better than where they began. So there was still some maintenance at follow-up. All right, so to illustrate with the maps, let's see. So you can see here we have E5, who's a little girl in 2nd grade, and she was isolated to begin with. She got the peer-mediated intervention. We came back in 6 weeks, and she's connected to a group. And then when we come back in 3 months, she's still connected to a group. So we just repeat those friendship surveys each time. So there's a peer-mediated advantage in that the number of received friendships was also greater for the kids who had the peer-mediated interventions. They were less isolated on the playground. So we had blinded observers go out every single week during the treatment and observe the kids. And they didn't know which treatment they were in. And so the kids that got peer interventions were less isolated on the playground. Not more engaged, just less isolated. And then the teachers who were not part of the treatment group or treatment plan actually rated the kids as better socially in the classroom. Right? So it seems like the peer-mediated approach is great, right? It seems to work. But what we did find was that even if a child was connected to other kids on the maps, or they had a reciprocated friend in the classroom, when you looked at them on the playground, they weren't any more engaged than any of the other kids. They were less isolated, but they were not more engaged. So it suggested that the interventions really need to take place in the context in which you want change to occur. So if you want them to look more connected on the playground, you should do the intervention on the playground. We hadn't done that in this study. So we developed another intervention where we developed some materials for teachers and then the playground assistants during recess. It's called Remaking Recess. It was named by one of our adults with autism who thought that that's what we should do, is just remake recess. So we have a series of strategies for the aides to help children stay engaged and connect to others. And one of the things that we thought about was that when children leave the classroom and they go out on the playground, one reason they may not find their friend is because playgrounds are very busy and loud and noisy and a little crazy. And so one strategy is to connect kids before they leave the class. So connecting them together so they end up with their friends when they get out on the playground. So we have a little video clip of a couple little boys who are going out to playground.
You may go, and I want you to have a conversation on the way about anything you want. But I want you two to have a conversation. You need to wait here.
This is the door
With Oliver.
to
Going to the dino yard for choice
choice time.
We're going to the dino yard for choice time, but
And then free
Skylar,
play.
not you.
Then it's free play time, so we get extra time at the dino yard.
Choice time and free play are the same thing. Now you guys need to have a conversation about something and walk.
Do you want to see something funny? Do you want to see something funny? Power terminated. You know how to get up. That's dangerous. Did you see that? Oh yeah. Wasn't that funny? Power terminated. Yeah. Every time I do. Oh, I like Iron Man. Iron Man's really go water. Because my video is cool. Yeah, Iron Man's so cool. Superman. No wait, Iron Man and Superman both can fly. I know. But Superman has more powers. Yeah. What? Don't run on me. Did you see me? I was like,
Okay, so you see those two little boys ended up together in the sand, right? And the other little boy, who's typical, lost his typical friend, and he ended up alone. So it does help to have a strategy for keeping the kids together as they go out. All right, and so we've done this study a couple times now, but in this first study, we taught the paraprofessional aides on the playground some strategies for just starting games, keeping kids together, and we again had blinded observers going out to recess and coding whether or not kids were engaged or not engaged. And you can see that the ones on the top this line, reflects the individuals who got treatment immediately, and these were waiting for treatment. And so there's a big difference in engagement that's observed when the aides use those strategies. So again, 6 weeks, 12 sessions, it's low intensity. It's not rocket science, and it seems to work. All right, so the approach used, though, has to fit the context of the school. So no matter what you do, you always have to shift your interventions to actually fit whatever that school situation is. There isn't really a single intervention, a best intervention. So we think about lots of different things that teachers can do. So one is just thinking about class organization so that kids can connect to each other and that there's some kind of organized movement within that class. So in the United States, people use a lot of visual schedules and use the classroom furniture to organize. So you don't have large open spaces where things can go awry. We also use schedules to move kids from one activity to another. So in this case, you have a little guy here who's using his schedule. Actually, this little guy also used the iPad and doesn't use it anymore, is talking completely, but used it transitionally. But you can see he's using his schedule to go from one activity to the next. And visual schedules can help with transitions. We find this even with highly verbal children. They need sometimes that visual schedule to know what's happening next. It can reduce anxiety. It can help, move them through much easier. So we use it for all kids. The other thing that has been helpful at lunchtime, where a lot of times our kids with autism are isolated. So in California, we lunch out on picnic tables at schools year-round. So they eat outside year-round because we don't have snow. You guys have snow, though, right? I think I saw snow from the plane. Did I see snow, or was that the water? Was that snow on the ground? Oh, it was just water. Okay, phew, good. Anyway, we eat outside year-round. And so sometimes, our kids tend to be isolated on those tables. So one way to encourage more engagement is to give them these kind of conversation starters. So actually our typical kids like these the most. So they get a new conversation starter every single day. And kids like to tell jokes and have these little things that they, funny things that they can do and talk about with each other. So those have been a hit. Okay, so what we've learned from these studies in schools is that peers matter, right? It's important to work with the peers because they can be more effective than an adult in engaging kids. And also it helps to prepare the environment. So a lot of our kids are taught lots and lots of strategies on what they're supposed to do in a situation. But if the environment isn't prepared for them to actually execute those skills that they have, they're not going to be very successful. So it's really important to think about the peers as the environment and work with them. Interventions are also needed where you expect that change. So if you're expecting them to be more engaged on the playground or to get along better with kids, then that's where that intervention needs to take place. All children can benefit from visual schedules, just like we benefit from our phone schedules or anything, all of the scheduling that we do, making lists, so on. And then, teachers and assistants in the school can apply these interventions. They're really simple. And so I think deploying these kinds of treatments into schools where kids spend most of their time is a much more effective way to teach social skills than to always have outside tutoring. So thank you.